Hi everyone, I'm Allie with PotomacBeads, and in this Better Beader episode, we are going to talk about crystals, particularly crystals that are in settings or open settings to place crystals and stones into, and how the hole orientation along the back of the setting may vary from shape to shape, or even may vary in one shape, particularly the sunflower settings, from one color to another. I'm going to show you some examples of this and talk about how the holes go through the backs of a lot of these settings and some issues and things you want to be aware of, as well as how to look at them and decide whether or not one can be switched for another in a project. So to talk about these Montes and Chatons and crystals in settings, I have a number of examples sitting around here to go over when you can switch out one for the other, as well as recognizing that the backs and where the holes are in the orientation is not always going to line up perfectly from one shape to another. One thing that leads to that for sure is just size. So size factor, something that is a little bit smaller generally is going to have holes closer together than something that is bigger. One thing to address first here is I have here some Montes versus some Chatons, and I wanted to show you the back of the Montes versus the Chatons. For Montes, they're going to have that nice cross section where they are completely solid along the back, and the thread can go one way and then the other way, having holes open basically, almost if you're picturing the back as a square on the points there. From there you have your Chaton, which your Monte is going to be a flat back crystal, which allows you to have that flat casing and covering. The Montes with that flat back allow you again to have that, whereas the Chaton has a pointed edge. Just like our crystals in setting, like this Lady Violet, it has to have room for that back or that pointed setting in it. You'll notice often that a lot of the different settings, whether or not there's the droplets like this that are pointed at the back as well versus the sunflowers or even those navettes, they're going to be a little bit different in their back. So it's not necessarily that all Chatons or all stone settings are going to have that open back and all Montes are going to have that closed back. It's not going to be that one stone is done one particular way and one is done the other. Sometimes they can be different settings and different backs depending on the manufacturer. A lot of the backs in the settings will have an opening exposed to it. So you will see that opening behind the set of the holes. You can see then that there's the opposite, that there's some that you don't see. They have a completely, like these galactic beads in settings, stones in settings, they have a completely closed back. It's interesting to see, based on the shape, where they decide to place the holes for the piece. These galactic stones here, you can see if you're looking where the hole goes, it goes straight across from there, and then it goes a tiny bit on an angle for the second hole. So they have to decide with an odd-shaped stone how they're going to line up the holes of the actual setting. Sometimes you'll even have the same stone, like these sunflowers here, that may have two different orientations or areas or ways that the holes are. Sometimes they're going to be further apart and go straight up and down, and sometimes they'll be closer and actually on a V. In the grand earrings here, I used the crystal sunflowers and I did utilize both holes. In this Lady Violet necklace, I only utilized one hole, so it honestly doesn't really matter how the holes line up because it's still going to face nice on the front side. When looking at some of these different shapes and where the holes are, you can look and see whether or not you can use them in place of a different shape. So say you want to make a beaded bead. Here is a beaded bead here that has that nice cross section in the middle. You can easily see then, like the 12th floor beaded beads that were in a box, you can take that Chaton or that crystal setting in the Monte and replace it for that X feature. So if you have a pattern that calls for an area along the front where it is going to have that Xing factor and the thread's going to be coming out basically and crisscrossing itself, that might be a great place for you to say, that's perfect. I can go in and I can use the Chaton or the Monte and switch it out for that and switch out the look and feel of the design. If you want to use a lot of these together in one project, you're just going to look and see how those crystal settings line up from one to the other. So looking here at this long Navette versus the Galactic, see it just sits a tiny bit bigger. Looking at the settings on this long Navette versus this teardrop and this droplet, you can see where the holes are. Now, sometimes another thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at these holes, you may not want to see the thread exposed along the back. With the settings that have the backs opened and the backs exposed, you can often use seed beads in between that back section there to hide the thread. I mentioned that in this Lady Violet that if you wanted to, you could have used seed beads in that line there so you don't expose your thread. The benefit of those that have the covered back is you don't see that thread and it's not exposed. The downside of that, however, is I can't just go through one hole and come out. I have to go through the whole entire setting. For this droplet, if I wanted to, I could go through one hole and come out without actually taking my thread through. So if I wanted to, I could put a head pin here and take my head pin through, and it would stop there, and the thread would be, or the needle or the wire end would be coming out. So there's benefits to both having the thread back closed as well as the back open for both. There again is not going to be necessarily a rhyme or reason why they do one or the other for particular settings. It's just going to be what the manufacturer does. You may even have a similar item that when you look at it, like these earrings here, the open frame earrings that we did in a tutorial, the setting in the jet long pieces here is going to be closer together than the blue zircon. So if you look at the blue zircon and where the holes line up right there, and then you look at the jet, you can notice that those holes are a lot closer together. So when you're looking for patterns or things like the grand earrings or these open frames or anything that uses the sunflowers, you may have to look at the back and at the setting and figure out how you're going to change your thread pass so that it works with your particular crystal shape in the setting. Generally speaking, when it's a Chaton versus a Monty, it's going to be pretty easy because your thread will go in the exact same way. If you have a sunflower that has holes together at the top and at the bottom versus that crisscross, you may have to change up your pattern a little bit for that design. When it happens that the holes are there and there rather than intersecting in the middle, you're just going to look at the pattern, look at the design. I actually did it in a Facebook Live as well, showing how to change something like these grand earrings to have the back mimic this, yet use the other holes that are in the piece itself. You could easily take a lot of patterns also that have been adapted for the sunflowers and switch out to a different crystal. You can say, perfect, they have the backs that way, I can go in now, and I can, instead of using that in the middle, I can figure out how to use my Galactic Stone. You may need to change your count slightly when it comes to seed beads and the way that the crystals are positioned along the back, but you can generally switch out one for the other. Especially if you're using just one hole, like I did here on purpose for the Lady Violet. I wanted to keep it nice and simple, knowing that sometimes the sunflowers have holes that are on the angle rather than holes that completely intersect in the back. This piece in particular, I could take any of these settings and switch it out if I wanted to, going straight through the crystal to get that same look and that same design with my thread going through the center. Again, anytime that you see the crisscrossing of beads along the front of like a beaded bead here, check out the different shapes that you have in settings that you can easily swap out for. Monties and these Chatons are a great opportunity and a great option to switch out for a lot of beads in different patterns and different pieces. Again, it's not going to matter for many of them what the setting along the back looks like, whether or not it's closed or open. What you want to always look at, whether or not, again, closed or having that opportunity to have it open, is where the thread is going to pass through the crystal and how that is going to alter a pattern that you already have that you want to try out this new design for, or how it is going to push you to create and come up with your own designs using them. These settings in Chatons and crystals and all of these different stones are really great to work with and very, very versatile. And you can play around again with looking at some of your older patterns. Say you could do this even with the chevron V pattern and put some of the crystals down the middle. You could work with some of the newer patterns as well that have that crossing of seed beads that occur and switch it out for the settings also. Just keep in mind, again, whether or not the backs are open or closed, look and see how the holes orient themselves and how they line up in your design to switch one out for another. As always, thanks so much for joining me in discussing the backs of a lot of these set stones, talking about the way the thread path goes, whether or not it's open and closed, and the benefits of having the backs in different styles. Remember, if you do want to check out any of these beads and settings, you can look below in the description to shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. Don't forget also, if you have helpful hints, you have any questions, or any input that you can help out this amazing beading community, do not hesitate to write that in the comment section and give a little feedback as well as opinions, and also helping out other people that may be watching this video. As always, if you do want to, subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy this little bit of knowledge that you may have gotten about switching out some stones and beads, as well as the different kind of solutions and looking at thread paths along the back of some of these beautiful set crystals.